Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Laura Brewer. I'm the Deputy Director for the Systems Analysis and Concepts Directorate. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Williams, who's our branch head of the Aeronautical Systems Analysis branch. He leads a branch that designs new aircraft and aviation concepts, mostly for the Aeronautics Systems Research Mission Directorate. So I'm used to saying ARD, and I'm trying to avoid saying acronyms, and so I've spelled out all the words to make sure I get them all correctly. So I've had the pleasure of working with Dan for the past several years, and I've witnessed his servant-style leadership and the amazing results that he gets from and how he treats all his people. So it's been a real pleasure working with him. And Dan's his past. I'm only going to hit some of the highlights because most of his presentation is about his career path and his journey. So he's worked as a deputy manager for the Transformational Tools and Technologies projects, the assistant branch head of his current branch, ASAB, and as a researcher in the Research Directorate Crew Systems and Aviation branch. He retired in 2009 from the Air Force Reserves as a Master Air Battle Manager, a career he served while he was also working at NASA. Dan has a BS in Electrical Engineering from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's in aviation aerospace management from Embry-Riddle. He's a licensed private pilot and has enjoyed aviation, both military and civil, throughout his career. He's married to Meg, and he has 3 children, Sarah, Abby, and Christopher. And now I'll let Dan share his journey. So, Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Troy and Liz Ward, for setting this up. It's quite an endeavor to be able to reflect upon your career, and I didn't realize that it would come as an opportunity, and it's quite a thing to be able to encapsulate it down to a quick story. So I'm going to try and do that. So here I just have 3 pictures at the bottom. That's kind of the phases that I'm going to reflect on. So I have my academic phase, and then my military phase, and now NASA here. Some of my heritage. So my parents, Owen and Betty Lou Williams. There's a picture on the left from my Air Force Reserve retirement. My mom went to be with the Lord in 2012 or so. This was 2009 photo. They lived in Williamsburg, so my dad's still up there right now, and it's good to be near him. He is a clear counsel for me. I seek his counsel in any of the big decisions that come about, and so he's been key to be able to walk with me through a lot of things, both good and bad. And so I hope you have a sounding board in your life that you can do that with. I know parents aren't always cookie cutter and not everything matches, but in my case, I've really been blessed. My father on the right it's a picture of me and him going to Portland, Oregon. We visited a PT boat that's out there. In World War II, he was a PT boat gunner's mate. So he is a World War II heritage. And this is the only floating restored boat in the world right now. So we went out and visited it on a thing called a Wish of a Lifetime. It was kind of like Make-A-Wish, which is for kids that have cancer and whatnot, but this is more toward the elderly. And it's a great program. I'd love to share that with you. Once again, he is one of the clear counsels in my life. And now let me go back a little bit further. My grandparents. So this is a picture of my grandmother on the left, Daisy. She lived to be 100, and this is her 100th birthday photo. I missed that party because I chose to play a college soccer game. So there are sometimes questions when you make decisions, right? And not necessarily is that the trade I would make today. Look back on that. Very dear lady. She prayed for me every day, and I know she's, a lot of who I am now. My grandfather on the right, Maynard Owen Williams. I have, my name is Daniel Maynard Williams, so I have his name as my middle name. He was National Geographic, the first foreign correspondent for National Geographic Society. So going way back. And the adventures of him traveling the world are just exploding all over, the history of National Geographic Society. And that's something that kind of incited in me, I think, some adventure. And that's something that he brought to our family. And just a little bit of an example. This is a picture of my father and I visiting a vessel that's still floating, and it's up in, or still sailing, and it's up in Maine. It's called the Bowden, and my grandfather used to go to the top of the mast and leap off into skim ice water near Greenland. So put that in your history and wonder how you're going to play with it. I think that's really something. But that's just the crazy stuff he would do. And, my grandfather led to my father, and now somehow I think I'm a tamer version of them both. But let me talk a little bit about Penn. So my time in school, how did I get there first? So I wanted to be an engineer. I love playing soccer. I applied to several schools, and I wanted to get into the best engineering school I could. My dad said this quote here, "Hey, consider ROTC scholarships. They'll really help pay the way." And, so I applied to all three services, Air Force, Navy, and Army. The Army answered right away, "Boom, we got you." And I said, "I don't know about that." And the Navy answered, "You can have a scholarship, but it's going to be conditional." And the Air Force, which is really what I wanted, honestly, because my dad steered me toward, he had come from working for the Air Force as a civilian. He had enjoyed airplanes and enjoyed satellites and things like that. And the Air Force was something he was steering me toward. Anyway, they answered with a full ride scholarship. Electrical engineering was in demand. I was intrigued by it. I had taken electronics courses through high school, so it was something that I thought I could carry into being an electrical engineer. Back in the day when you did like a device where you play music and it connected to a series of lights, and it would make a sound visual thing where you could play your music and watch these colorful lights at the same time to the music. So I did stuff like that. Sound organ, I think is what it was called. And so anyway, in going through school, I also played soccer, and I had just a series of teams and things that kind of led toward, I had this rival coach who had attended Penn, and he kind of linked me up with the head coach at Penn. I went on a recruiting trip, and everything seemed to click. And so that was how I ended up putting three things together. And that is something that I will say also, is that when you choose three things that are very demanding, electrical engineering, ROTC, and varsity sport, that is mixing worlds that all want 100% of your time. And I learned that you can't do 100% of your time on three things. So that was something, I had good years in each, but not all at the same time. So, I don't know if I can get this video to play. I hope so. Oh, this is key. I'm going to try. All right, what's the outcome? I'm in goal. Score is 2-2. Penn versus Temple, 1985. Temple's ranked about 10. Penn isn't ranked at the moment. What's the outcome? What's the outcome? I hope it works. Save! End score was 2-2. We continued to advance, and it was just something I wanted to brag about. So from here, I also had a in connecting back to my ROTC, I had to put in a dream sheet. So this is where you say your future assignment desires. And so I put in a dream sheet. I wanted to do space operations, systems engineering, acquisition engineering, those sorts of things. I had to go through a qualifying medical exam. And one of the key questions was, are you willing to release nuclear weapons? I was 23. I'd never considered such a question before. And, I said, that's a lot of responsibility, a lot more than I'd ever assumed before. And the guy says, thank you, you passed. So humility is a key thing in handling big responsibility. So here I am. This is me getting ready to go to my first assignment, which was Hesse-Schoellendorf Air Station in Germany. And I had been through training at this point. I've been through 2 assignments down in Florida and Phoenix. And now I was getting ready to go on an airplane and go that way. This is the unit that I was stationed at. So there's 4 emblems around our central logo. And I got my mug here, that's still in my office, so I always carry that around. The 4 emblems show that we are part of NATO and a part of the Air Force and hosted by a German site. And here's a little bit of interesting times that I had. So I found these 2 pictures from the Library of Congress of the reunification of Germany time period. So on the left is East Germany and West Germany, and on the right you see Germany unified. So I didn't know that I was going to be a part of the unification of Germany when I went. I showed up, and that started to happen. The East Germans poured across the border in West Germany, and it was just a crazy time for their culture. And then we're trying to figure out, okay, what is the operation that we're supposed to train for? So we were supposed to train for this huge influx of Soviet forces coming in through a thing called the Fulda Gap. And so we were supposed to be at these radar sites and deployed to areas and be able to watch what was going on in the skies and control that. Well, this whole idea of now the threat aircraft that we've been training against are now owned by the same country that we're hosted by. It was upside down. So I traveled all over. I had training down here off of Sardinia. We traveled into France and did some things. We did all kinds of trips around Germany. I also had some other trips, and I'll just point out where, let's see if I can find it here. Tallinn. I went to Moscow, Leningrad, and Tallinn on a trip that I'm going to show a little bit about. So this is our radar site. It was called the Hill, and we could see, if you remember the Berlin corridors, that's how you accessed into Berlin. We could see the southern and central Berlin corridors, and we did surveillance of that. We had about 120 trucks on site, and we would be able to pack up all of our facilities and leave from here and go anywhere within the range of the vehicles, obviously, that kind of thing. But it would allow us to be kind of covert, in a sense, to start an operation in a new location and be a little bit more mobile is the intent. So mobile theater air control system. And it's hard to see here. I have a better picture coming up. There's a radar there, and this is an operations center that we operated out. So we had 2 kind of central areas, and the rest is mainly support. So you can see how logistics is a key part of any kind of unit. So on the top left, that's our radar. It's called the Tipsy 43E, and it could see 100,000 feet, surface to 100,000 feet, and 240 miles. Kind of line of sight is really the reality of it. And those are limits by curvature of the Earth, actually. The picture on the right, shoot. Didn't want to give you a preview yet. Picture on the right is of our control van. So we have a control van that's attached to the radar, and we could do 2 scopes in there, and we would control missions from there. And it shows that it's a manual environment, and you can't see the radar displays because it's a dark room, and when they take pictures of it, it never works. So that's how it always has been. Freezing in there, 50 degrees in the van, you'd have to stay in there for 4 to 5 hours. And then, just a quick restroom break in between missions type thing. That was quite an experience. We called it being the maestro. So you're running sort of many missions at once sometimes, maybe just one mission, trying to get airplanes refueled, trying to get them rescheduled back into where they're supposed to be, and trying to help them find their targets. And the main mission that we dealt with was air-to-air, so going against an air threat. But we also did some air-to-surface, which was escorting those missions. And down here in the bottom, I was a convoy commander too. So a couple things I learned about being a convoy commander, 2 stories. I was a second lieutenant, first month, got to go exercise the trucks, okay? Lieutenant, you take the unit. They only gave me about 15 trucks, I think. Attached to trailers, mobilizers is what we call them, and go out and make sure that they're operational. So go on up to this location and come back. Simple. Except I went down a one-way street the wrong way. And now when you get a whole convoy going down the wrong way and it tees at the end, there's no way out. So you turn to your first sergeant and you say, okay, what do you do? Okay, let's back them up, sir. Okay, well, can you help me do that? Because you guys have a little experience. So you lean on your first sergeants and they work you through. So that was something. They backed it all up, took all the thing apart, and then reversed it out. That was non-time critical, so we had plenty of time to do that. It took all day. So another part of this picture, it shows that there's this is our radar folded up, and that's how it would deploy. And we would sometimes go as far as about 4 hours away, something like that. We went to this one place, and this is toward the end of my time at this unit. The operation, we would hurry, we would slowly get to the deployment, and then everybody would want to hurry home. We had this one truck that was in the middle of our whole convoy. It was 69K13. 1969 it was made. So that comes from Vietnam era. It was an old truck. We called it the dog. It's going to slow down everybody. And the way you would do a convoy is you'd have to watch in your rear view mirror the guy behind you. And if you could see him, then you're good spacing. If you couldn't see him, then you're too far ahead, so you slow down. And everybody does that. So convoy integrity, they called that. So we tried to go through all these towns doing this, and on the Autobahn, everything. And some incredible stories about that, but the best one that I want to share was we left our deployment site. So this is toward the end. Remember, everybody's trying to rush, and I've got this one vehicle that's stuck in the middle, and it's slow. Everybody's trying to rush home. Well, we were in the 5th convoy, and we'd gone 4 hours away. Several of the trucks from previous convoys had gotten lost. So I show up, I leave the deployment site, we've got 22 trucks leaving the site, and you got to be accountable for all 22 trucks. Very simple, right? So I show up at the radar site, end of deployment, and I've got 26 trucks. I gained a few. That was pretty good. That was a lot better than the T intersection going the wrong way, isn't it? So anyway, that was kind of interesting times. The guy on the right, Lumpy Gowing, he was a mentor to me there. So you got to find the people that you connect to who can teach you the craft. And this guy was known as a patch wearer. So everybody's heard of the Navy's Top Gun. Well, the Air Force has a thing called Fighter Weapons Instructor Course. And Lumpy was a graduate of that. So he was a patch wearer. And everybody respected him. He had a voice that could just shut down an entire room, and you just listen to him with a presence. And he also had the ability to orchestrate like no other person I've ever seen with the fewest amount of words on a radio. So he called it painting a picture with 5 words or less. And you looked at that, okay, how do you do that very expediently? And he would. And so he was a key mentor to me and still a friend. He had this other expression, it was called my voice only. And he would do this when there's too much craziness going on the radio. And his presence was such that people said, oh, that's Lumpy, I'm gonna listen to him. And he would orchestrate all the next series of movements between the aircraft and get everybody going where they needed to go. So the key there is that he would change one thing at a time and move people along. Even in the most stressful situations, that is so important. The next guy that I dealt with was, I went to work in data links. And this guy taught me, okay, here's what you do. If you can't get a good signal, you change this knob and this knob and this knob and this knob and this knob. And I was like, well, how do you know which thing changed what? He says, it's okay, just do it again the next time. So that's changing all the variables at once. I learned that that was not so effective. So 2 small lessons. Okay, I had an opportunity to go to the Paris Air Show in 1989. The Soviet Union brought their best stuff to this show, and it was really something. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of the MiG-29 crash in 1989. It happened a day before we arrived. Well, they still had another MiG-29 there, so there's one on the left. And then Su-27, Su-25, and this is the Mi-28. So these are all their newest aircraft that they used. And we were training against all of their techniques, their tactics, their procedures. So it was just a salivating thing to be able to go and see these aircraft in firsthand. And their demonstrations that they did, very powerful aircraft, very rugged, and the noisy, they definitely were intimidating in that sense. They introduced new maneuvers. They had this Cobra tail slide, and it was in an air show. Nobody had ever seen a vehicle do that before, airplane do that before, especially a jet. And it would come out and do its thing. And the end of the demonstrations, the pilot's still in here in this one. He gets off that airplane, and it was like the Super Bowl. These guys were just high-fiving, and this was the most incredible thing. So it was really something to be a part of. So these are some other things the Soviets brought. Anybody recognize these vehicles? So this is the Mariah, I think it's called. It's hard to pronounce Russian words. But 6-engine AN-225, and they brought their space shuttle ski with them. And this is the robotic one that went up in orbit and came back. Never flew again, but we brought an SR-71. And this is the last public appearance of the SR-71. And you could think that everybody's, enthralled by the entire show. But when this thing started to move for its demonstration, everybody stopped. It was quite honoring. Just a great air show to attend. And that's a picture of me on the left. I had to wear glasses all the time, so that's an interesting thing that the military does to you. They put you through eye exams. And I like contacts, but the medical procedures to get contacts in the Air Force was pretty thorough. And so I just gave up after a while. I was like, okay, I can get the contact through you, or I can wait so long and go through all this machination, or I can wear glasses. So that's what I did. So this is where I was talking about going to Tallinn, or I said Moscow and Leningrad and Tallinn, capital of Estonia. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and so I was there. This is a trip I took in April of 1990, and Allied Checkpoint Charlie, it was American, British, and French. It was the sectors that came together there. And so this is a checkpoint that we had to go through in order to get from, through the corridors first, driving, And then to get to East Berlin, you had to go through this procedure. And they still had the procedure in effect, even though the wall was coming down. So you can see there's a mixture of how you're going to do this. And if you've seen the movie The Bridge of Spies, you see the movie, or you see the wall going up, and you realize how quickly it was going up. Well, it took quite a while to bring it down. And this is looking east, very bleak buildings that they had right on the border, so that was something. I flew on this thing, IL-18, smoking, rattling, scary thing. This was, I think, 1940s vintage. I'm flying this in 1989, 1990. But we got there. So it was a picture in Red Square. I was able to visit some families that, there was this one story I want to share. So Leningrad is now called St. Petersburg again. We were there and we were visiting these families that had, I guess there are 5 families in a 2-bedroom apartment. And they were just couples, and they were the most content, happy people I'd encountered. They would sing folk songs every Friday night, and they helped us. They served us, and we just had a pleasure in enjoying meeting them. And it was great. One of the fellas was a conscript in the Soviet Navy, and he comes up to me and he asks through an interpreter, he says, "Soviet Union, friend or enemy?" I'm in his house. I'm traveling with a bunch of school teachers, but I'm an Air Force guy, and they obviously know that. And so Glasnost was this thing that Gorbachev was promoting, so that maybe allowed some of the freedom of travel and that kind of thing, but it was an intimidating question to receive. And I looked at him and I said, I hope so. That's our intent. So it was a very difficult question to answer, and knowing that all the things I'm training for, like I was saying, are against those aircraft that they own. So I went to, sorry about this being cut off at the top. This is Tyndall Air Force Base, 1990 and 93, the 81st Range Control Squadron, Whetstone Control. And we did the Air Force Weapons System Evaluation Program there. It was high-risk testing, so this is where we would be out of the Gulf of Mexico, and we would do these live-fire testing against drones. And one of the things to take away from this is that it was very procedural control, but then there was all these layers of backup. So in us dealing with automation and autonomy, there has to be this construct, I think, that has all these degraded operations thought through and taken care of. And so that was something that we dealt with. So, down here we would have contingencies, loss of data link. If the damaged drone, we would sometimes have to blow up a drone. We'd have ordnance problems where if somebody didn't fire, they had to be able to bring that back or jettison it. Others were managed by chain of command, and so our command and control room would orchestrate all the alternative operations. There's a lot more to it. We would clear the airspace with a sea surveillance radar airplane and run the operation. That's also where I met my bride. So this is me and Meg. I'm a first lieutenant here, I think. And I had braces on my teeth. That was kind of an interesting time. So the previous fangs that I had, those are now starting to wane away. And when I went through the braces scenario, that was another thing I dealt with the military. Flight dentist said, no problem, you can get them, but you have to pay for them yourself. Okay, I'll go out and I'll buy them. So I did that. I showed up for my flight medical. Now it's the doctor, and he says, what are those in your mouth? So they're braces. And he's like, yeah, I know, but you can't have those unless you've gone through a waiver process. So now all of a sudden I can't do my job because I have to go through this waiver process. So their thoroughness and going through their bureaucracy was something that I encountered. And so you got to check with everybody when you're doing something. But more importantly, I met my bride there. Did I mention that? You know, we got married, bought a puppy, and we moved on from there to Langley. So this is a unit that's now closed. First Fighter Wing had a air control squadron just across the runway. And you know where the Roma area is? So this is where the blimp Roma was launched from. This is the same area that we had our radar at. It looked east so we could see the training areas out in the Atlantic. So anyway, this is a unit where I was able to bring some expertise that I now had to a younger unit, and I became the chief of standardization evaluation. This is the guy that certifies all the other maestros. And so that was quite a responsibility to take on. And I had one theme. People I said, oh, he's going to give me additional training. Oh, he's going to give me additional training. Yeah. So my thought was, okay, you might be minimally qualified, but we need you. So I'm going to assign additional training, and that means that you have to be kind of going through further training while you're doing your job. And that allowed people to grow. It didn't say, no, you can't do your job. And that was kind of a philosophy I was trying to instill. I ran into friction a little bit with my higher-ups on that sometimes. They said, how'd you qualify that guy? I said, he was qualified. However, here's the list of additional training. And then they would finally get off my back. So that was a risk that I was trying to take. We would deploy to Little Creek, sometimes Elizabeth City. One time we put tents at the bottom of this hill. It rained, so that's not a good place to put your tents. We had up to 2 feet of water in our tents. And so what do? Abort. Everybody packed up and went home. So it was from this assignment that I left active duty. The Air Force at the time was having its drawdown. So this is post-Desert Storm, and the drawdown that they had would cut about a third of the force. Well, this was a voluntary separation incentive time. So they offered bonuses, and I took one of those and got out. And it was another transition. So what am I going to do next? And I had that question. So I worked a little while as a contractor for the Air Force, and it was theater battle management against the Scuds. So we did some large-scale simulations, and we worked kind of a future scenarios, if you will, and I gained some experience in using large-scale simulations and developing them and running those sorts of scenarios and that software. And that came in handy when I started applying to NASA. One last part. When I was leaving active duty, my colonel, who was my commander at the time, said, thank you for your service. You have done everything that you have said you would do, and the Air Force appreciates you. So I really liked that. It wasn't a kick in the pants, it was we appreciate you. So I went into the reserves. So recruiters will find you, and they'll say, hey, you were in the Air Force, why don't you come back? So, okay, I like the Air Force, so it worked out. So now I'm doing two things. I was in my contractor job and back in the Air Force Reserves. This is kind of late in my career, so this is my last promotion. It was in 2006. And that's my retirement picture with my family. And, I learned some great things in the reserves. We did I was in two major assignments. One was over in Norfolk and Suffolk, the Joint Forces Command, and we would do the training that would be done for like General Schwarzkopf's staff, the Joint Forces Commander, and his staff. And one of the exercises, we would do these large-scale simulations, and I learned the difference between comparative analysis and deterministic. So now, okay, do you want to know, do you take your army around to the west side of this operation, or do you want to know you're going to lose 342 tanks that way. Which is more important? So that was the type of information that now I started to realize, okay, he needs to know, go this way instead of the exact number, because that's a better decision-making piece of information. So that was the type of thing that we worked. And then I also had another experience where I met an ambassador. So during one of the exercises, they would call in these senior leaders, and there was this one fella who was just kind of casual and very comfortable with himself, and nobody really seemed to understand what his history was. So I went up and asked him. He says, "Oh, I was the ambassador to Somalia." Okay. This is Ambassador Oakley, who was in Somalia prior to the Battle of Mogadishu. It's famous for the movie Black Hawk Down and the book. Tremendous book. The thing that he would do was get people together. So I said, "Okay, you have all these warlords. What did you do?" He says, "I would have tea every week. And I would tell them, the United Nations is coming to bring food to the Somalis. And this is how we're going to do it." And he would just look and have an encounter with a visual encounter and a conversational encounter with each of these people. And they may not have agreed, but they knew. And it was his way of communicating that we're in this together. And he built that environment of people that were very disparate in belief in how they operated. And that degraded when he was removed just by change of administration. And the next guy that came in stayed on a ship. And so he wasn't embedded and involved, and all this communication broke down, and that's what precipitated the Battle of Mogadishu. So that was his take on it. But getting people together, that was the key thing. So 1999 to here, that's my time at NASA. So there's an overlap again, where I'm in the Air Force Reserves and at NASA. One of my first assignments, I came here to do air traffic management, and then I got to do this stuff in the cockpit. I was like, this is cool. So now I'm helping pilots, and I had to learn their craft. I loved it. So synthetic vision, you know, you may all understand this. It's trying to generate a synthetic view of the out the window scene that you may not be able to see. So combining sensor inputs and database inputs to be able to generate that for the pilot. So we did a series of things, and I was in charge of the team that did a concept of operations development for commercial and business aircraft. And so a couple things here is that I showed up and I said, okay, well, let's get a group of industry and academia together and government, and let's have a workshop and generate input for this ConOps. I said, let's do it in a month. And they looked at me like, how can you do that in a month? Well, that's what I used to do. You know, get things done. So it was a little friction up front, but we did it. Got 100 people in the room. They paid their way, and we generated this whole ConOps document as a result of it that kind of guided a lot of the research that went forward. Another thing that happened was I had experience since I was a contractor of working for GSA. So that's the vehicle to get you on board. And what I found was there was kind of a mindset when I joined here. The team said, you have to go through this way to get to the contractor that you need, and this, that, and the other, and it's going to take about 6 or 8 months. I was like, how about I do it through GSA and get them on board in 2 weeks? And they didn't believe me, so went over to procurement. Sure enough, the company that we wanted was one of several that would compete. It was a fair and open competition. GSA already has pre-selected things, so it's kind of like, in a sense, buying some paper. But it really worked out well, and we started and did a benefits assessment, had it all in hand in 6 months. So it was a whole different approach. So bring your experiences with you. That's one of the things. And then another theme I have is yes is more interesting than no. So when somebody gives you a no, wonder where that's coming from, and then try and make it such that they understand or they want to say yes. And so there's kind of bring this solution sort of approach to things. And that's what I was trying to do. So some other things I did, I worked on advanced navigational procedures, and this is showing some Alaska Airlines stuff. They're pretty fun. There's no technology they don't like. It's kind of their theme, but it has to make its way into our cockpit for a return on investment in 18 months. So if it takes longer than that, we don't want to buy it. So there's that kind of pressure, if you will. So, okay, how do we do research that will meet that need? Now that shapes how you're starting to ask and answer questions in your research. So I won't go through too much detail here, but we went through, I had the opportunity to jump seat with these guys. This is kind of a fun approach. If you can see, if you do a missed approach, you got mountains in the way, that's bad. So they developed these curved procedures called required navigation performance, and they adopted avionics that would support those procedures, and then they would check them. So there's pilots, two pilots controlling the aircraft here at the same time as the automation through the most critical phase of flight. So there's check and balance from the human as well as the automation. So that's how they do things. And special aircrew authorization is required to be able to do this. So not anybody can just fly Alaska Airlines procedures. So as we try and increase our automation and autonomy, there's lessons that we can learn from companies like this that, they flew these same procedures over and over and over, and then presented a boatload of data. They flew them in good weather, and then printed the FAA a boatload of data and said, we can do this in good weather, how about we try it in poor weather? And they convinced the authorization procedure, or authorization people to buy off on that. So, worked on SATs, and I have a few charts on SATs. I really enjoyed this. It was probably one of the biggest highlights I had in crew systems. And the problem that we were trying to solve was, okay, you have these new airplanes, can you do point-to-point operations with all these small airports? Well, we developed a series of procedures in airspace around a GPST sort of operation that increased, instead of a pilot calling up ATC who can't see him land, these are non-radar, non-towered airports, and he can't see him do his approach and landing through his radar. If you have a new procedure that allows everybody to know where they're supposed to go, automation in the cockpit, and then a sequencer from the ground that kind of just gives, okay, you're number 1, 2, 3, 4. If you start to work all that out, now you have something that is simple and everybody can adhere to, and it increases operations by about 3 times. So we developed that. And then there's some of the automation that we did. This is a screenshot that we did of the Danville demo. So Marion Blakey, who was the FAA administrator, and Mike Griffin, NASA administrator, were there. It was a pretty high pressure thing, but we were able to get 6 aircraft into this operation, landed within 30 minutes. And so that opened up everybody's eyes. And these are some of the cockpit displays. We flew it all in our Cirrus here, but there were 5 other aircraft that were all disparate designs. So one of the other things you learn there is it's easier to replicate one thing over and over than it is to try and make 6 different things use the same initial technology. So that was a lesson. This is just a picture of the team. I got to be a little bit of the kind of the talking head, if you will, doing that kind of stuff. But a little bit of opportunity to fly in the airplane, and the team that we had there in Danville. Did some wake avoidance procedures. And so it's a very simple concept. The idea is if you have parallel runways and you have one that's staggered, the crosswind that you have here is allowing now the departure of this aircraft even though this one is ahead of it. And it allows you to compress your release of the departures. So we worked this with the FAA, and we were getting some traction to be able to get that done in St. Louis and Houston to be able to be implemented. Doing joint work with the FAA is very near term. So that was something that you have to adopt and learn every single thing that is their procedural world. And that was something that I felt very constraining in terms of research. But we still do a lot of this at NASA. It's just something that I learned. And I did that. This is Gary Loren, so enjoy some of the times with your friends when you're doing your research. This is me and him at an AIAA conference that was in Anchorage. Now on to this branch. So I was the assistant branch head, and I wish I had a picture of Bill Kimmel and me in the branch, but I don't have that picture. This is the second branch head I worked with, which is Mike Marcolini, and all the crew. So we design airplanes, and we also did other airspace and safety and the analyses that pull the story together for decision makers. This is a great group of folks, and it was very humbling to come into this and knowing that now I'm shifting careers from being more technical to having to be more managerial. The Air Force had trained me a lot in this, being an officer. However, NASA culture is very different from the Air Force, so I didn't want to try and come in and use that same culture, if you will. So I couldn't. And it's good to stretch yourself when you're making these career changes. One of the key things that I remember showing up for was it was a briefing that I guess Craig and Mark Wynn and Tom Ozorowski were doing. It was working with DARPA, and it was on the DARPA Vulture program. This was to try and generate a 5-year UAV. And I realized this is the A team. I was really, really pumped about being able to work in this branch when I saw this briefing, because we not only worked some designs that generated analysis of alternatives. So this is something that we talked about through the Air Force. We always contracted out and do all that kind of stuff. But now we're doing it hands-on. We developed the tools that would analyze the vehicle, and nobody else had these tools, so we were the experts in that. And then we were in this role of advising some very high-powered folks in DARPA, and it was really kind of an interesting thing. And I just took that and said, I'm really excited to be in this branch. It's really, really cool. And it was humbling, because I realized I can't do that. I need help, and this branch is the help. And these are just a smattering of some of the concepts we've been working back then. A lot of these have progressed. Some of them have evolved and whatnot. So one of the things that we kind of get dug for in systems analysis is it's not it's just a pretty picture. Well, there's substance behind every single one of these vehicles. And I really think that is an important message that needs to be shared. The vehicle design that we work at the conceptual level then communicates research needs. It also can show value to researchers as they roll up their technologies into this system level concept. So there's kind of a give and take there, and it starts that dialogue that shows what is possible and then tries to advance towards something that can be in flight. Then I did a stint as a deputy project manager, so I proposed a detail. I said, okay, I'll do about a year in ARD and serve the Aerosciences project, which became T-Cube now. And this is a picture of me and Jim Heidman and Mike Rogers on the left in front of Pleiades. So that's at Ames, and that's the supercomputer that we run that we, as a project, funded more use of than any other project. So that was something that we were just touring at the time. And then the guys on the right, that's kind of a before and after, where the guy in the green is Stan Smeltzer, and then myself. Stan was the first deputy project manager. I was the second, and then Rob Scott is the current of T-Cube. So that was just something that we enjoyed. And then I had to get another SR-71 picture in there. You got to have that. But that's at Edwards, and still just awes me. So now is the current branch, and once again, I returned. Mike Marcolini retired, and I had the choice again. Do I stay as deputy project manager and continue working there? I was enjoying that. I also enjoyed coming back to, or thinking about coming back to SAC-D and coming back to work with folks a little bit more closely. So that was kind of what I got to. And people will say that branch management has some thankless parts to it. I think they're underselling the part that is really key, which is you do see what is possible when you connect with people in a much more real way, and I really enjoy that. So that's something I brought in. And we serve almost all the projects in ARMD. So we're heading toward these X-planes, and I brag about this because that's ARMD's poster, and we worked on all 4 of these vehicles, and then there are an explosive amount of other vehicles that we've got it behind this story. So it's a really neat thing to be a part of this. And so you're familiar with, here's the low boom flight demonstrator. That's a Lockheed concept that we've been evaluating. This is X-57. So that one's about ready to be built into phase 2 of 4 phases. This is a hybrid wing body, so that's been something that we've been working for many years, but there's different variants of it, and so we continue that. And then the last one over here is, we call it Stark Able, so it's a hybrid electric concept that can be potentially retrofitted onto existing airline fleet, so, or a next generation quickly. So the premise there. And so this guy would be electrically powered potentially, and these would be generating motors and allow that vehicle to operate. So you got to have your extracurricular activities along the way, and I could have put in 1,000 pictures, but I just didn't have time to pull that all together. It just shows that, you know, I learned how to dive when I was in the Air Force, did all kinds of mountain biking, did all kinds of other crazy things. This is a picture of me doing Kung Nu here in the gym. So that's a martial art that's available here at Langley. And with my bride and I, we were out at the AIAA conference in San Diego, and so we were on the aircraft carrier there. This is looking down on a statue that's there. And then my branch will tell you that I always throw this in. Lacrosse is a great sport. So I found myself coaching all my kids through soccer, basketball, karate, now lacrosse. You got to add it in. It's been great. But this is my daughter Sarah is the one in the top. Abby is the one taking the picture, and then Meg, and then Chris off on the left. So these are some things I'm trying to take toward the future. So the top of this says beyond. I'm just being patient. I'm not trying to say that I'm going to be in this position forever, because there's a couple things with that. One, I would be dominating the position, and that prevents somebody else from having the opportunity to come into it. So that's not necessarily something I want to do, but there has to be a fit. So that has to be something that you think about. And so I'm going to be doing this job as well as I can before looking for change. And that's, I think, important. When I say sharpening the sword or stretching to new capability, those are forms of training. So I have a current capability, and I want to make sure that's sharp. And then I also have something that, what is the next step? So how do I stretch to that? And then these are some principles I just have. Lead by example. So it's kind of a trite statement unless you put some thought behind it. The key for me, respect people. Every person on center comes from a different background. You don't know a whole lot of that until you really get to know them. So it's very important to recognize that into that conversation, it's a gift that you just are meeting this individual. And then you have to respect them right where they're at. I think that's key. Rich Ancliffe did an article that was on the expression of religious liberty in the workplace. This was in our base newspaper, I think about 15 years ago. And it boiled down to this, respect. And so when you encounter somebody, you're not trying to change them, but you are trying to connect. And so to connect on a real level is allowed. Sometimes the individuals say, that's enough, fine, respect that. And then there are times when you can use that intimate connection that you have with somebody as a friendship and build on it. Maintain high standards. So there's two things here, high standards with grace. So what that means to me is that there's two sides. Recognize that we're not perfect, trying to do as best we can, maintain high standards along that path, but also permit risk-taking and failure in the things that are hard to accept sometimes. And then I try and maintain this balanced life. So it's not just NASA, it's not just Air Force, it's not just my family. There has to be this mix. And how do you balance that? Then collaboration. And then the last part is seek the counsel of others. So collaboration is a mechanism to connect to others, especially when you have a problem that requires something more than your group has. So do that and then stretch. The seeking the counsel of others to me comes under, I have a group of guys that I meet with each Friday morning, and they're very dear to me, and I seek their thoughts on how to operate in life. I've mentioned my father, and that's really been something of a gift too, to be able to have that relationship. Well, I hope you have somebody that can provide that counsel sounding board for you. And sometimes it's a mentor formally, sometimes it's just informal relationships and friendships. So I throw in this stay near my dad. He's 92, so I'm just enjoying the time that I have with him, and every day is a gift there. And then I can see in the next 10 years or so, I'm going to have an after NASA, and so I'm not sure what that's going to look like. So trying to prepare for that. I don't know that it's just leisure, so I think that's important, and I really want to think through that thoroughly. The world is big, but it's getting smaller every day, so there's a lot of opportunities. So those are the things I had to share. I could have shared so much more. There's each slide is a world unto its own, and then there's so many things I had to cut out. I looked at that and I'm like, oh my gosh. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to entertain them. I'd be glad to share anything more with you on this background. But that's what I had this morning.